So far, we've seen almost exclusively PDK decks, but I'm still waiting for somebody to try to develop a list that can fight against it, and it looks like we're not going to see that today. So,
Never mind. Yep, just kidding.
just kidding. Just kidding. It's going to be Forest versus Rune. It's going to be interesting. If I remember off the top of my head, I believe this is a Roach list. Oh no, it's going to be the neutral list. So, I've heard this talked about a little bit. What do you think about this particular Strix version of the neutral Forest deck? MV, and do you think it has a good chance against Burn Rune? Take it away.
I think Neutral Forest is it's a very solid list if it's able to establish Beauty and the Beast. I think that's its entire game plan, and it goes off of the power of Elf Twins Assault. Even though Strix could establish a pretty powerful curve, I think that's what it wants to do for the most part. But how do you think this will go, Mofu?
I think it really comes down to, as you said, Beauty and the Beast is the spotlight of the matchup. But Fantasy also has, I think, the one answer that any commonly played Rune deck would have in Mutagenic Bolt. So finding that, whether or not Griffin actually does find Beauty and the Beast, I think are pivotal moments for us to watch for.
For sure, for sure. Griffin's also going first, so oh, wow, Dance of Death there as well. Griffin's also going first, so unfortunately for him, it'll be harder to get the actual cards in his hand necessary to trigger the neutral combos.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of options for a turn 2. Something I've been kind of, as a person who doesn't play very much neutral forest, something I always watch for in this matchup is just how much aggression they go for early on, or how much they're willing to dump out their hand, especially when they don't open something like Staircase to Paradise to refill it back.
Right, that is a very interesting point, since if you don't have Staircase, you can't refill back into the neutral synergy, so you're basically just trying to let your deck's curve carry you, and unfortunately he's got double Ariat in hand. That's not good. I do want to point out real quick that Fantasy does play double Petrification, so even if a Beauty and the Beast comes down and actually gets established, I don't think he has too many problems answering this.
Right, that would be 4 answers in his deck, and 2 of which could be searchable by Dwarf Alchemist. Also has a Calamitous Curse if he manages to injure the Beauty and the Beast into its range.
That is right, yeah. Dwarf Alchemist, sometimes kind of a forgotten effect. If it evolves, it searches for cards that have the word Earthright in their text box, and Petrification does, so.
Though, this is a lot of pressure put down by this Strix here. Even something like Levi doesn't quite get around it. So I'm not sure if he really...
It is pretty strong, yeah.
Other Fantasy really has the luxury to go for this Dwarf Alchemist, but he seems to be going for it.
Gets the evolve, so we'll switch for an Earthright card now. And finds a Master Mage, okay.
It's a very strong card, but I'm not sure how much it really will work out in this matchup, or if it's going to play a very significant role coming up.
I think it'll be perfectly fine, considering Griffin's hand is attempting to build a red brick house. However, Staircase top decked right now. He could just go face for 5, set up Staircase, and then have B&B next turn if he wants to.
The luxury afforded by
very
having
high chance
Strix...
of it, at least. My bad.
Right. I think playing the Strix affords him so much of a luxury to do anything on turn 5 just because of how little really answers this cleanly.
Right. A 4-play 0.55 is pretty good, I've heard. Could also evolve into a 7/7 if he wanted to, although I don't think he'll go for that play.
Do you think he's afraid of anything in particular answering it? I mean, I imagine that he would know, even should he evolve it for face and play aggressively here. Something like Levi, with an evolve point, would be able to clear it, even from full health.
Right, Levi can do 7 full, along with the Crimson Sorcery. He does have to probably consider that his opponent has 2 Earthrights established, so if he just goes face here, 3 damage could happen, along with a burn spell. Even a Dance of Death could happen, and I'm sure he knows that. So Staircase will likely be... Ooh, Dance of Death on the 3/1, and if he evolves here? Oh gosh. Oh my gosh.
I find that really interesting, because you'd imagine the Staircase would be able to pull a Beauty and the Beast. But very aggressive. Very interesting.
And it's not like Ariat is playable next turn, so if by some grace this thing lives, you can't play Ariat anyway. That is interesting. So Dance of Death will be the play backwards. Both players playing Dance of Death on their 5-play point turn.
The Dance of Death does conserve being able to use the Levi for later. I wonder if Griffin had the idea of doing that into this sort of play, saying if this doesn't work, at the very least it will take the entirety of Fantasy's turn, deal a lot
Right.
of damage to him, and then give him an opening.
It is likely that that's what he was considering. Also, something interesting that Fantasy is kind of playing a burn deck. You know, Carl is played in just about every Earthright deck period because of how good he is. But he does have Taboos and Petrification and Calamitous Curse, so he's got like, he's more of a mid-range dirt, really, in reality.
It won't be long now.
It's just like back in the old days.
He goes for the Levi now. Throws the Sorcery, also going for a pretty aggressive option.
Yeah, I was gonna imagine the Sorcery would be safe, but I guess not. And Beauty and the Beast is not drawn, unfortunately, for Griffin.
Now, short
He
of a
does not
Beauty
have
and the
that
Beast,
option
I'd
available.
imagine.
Yeah, that's what he wanted.
I'd imagine it's a
Ugh, this makes
Hector that
this
he's
turn
going
weird
for.
now. What do you think he does this turn? I don't even know.
The most attractive option looks like a Hector. I don't really see any other line of development. He could go for the Carrot, but I guess that would be a play where he goes for Kaiser, Carrot, and then plays a 2-drop. There's not
Right.
very much pressure on Fantasy's board. He knows he doesn't have the Crimson Sorcery.
On the warfield, a shining helmet. Are you defying
That is
me?
true. Double Master Mage Levi, however, is going to make a lot of these plays feel very weird. Especially this Evolve play. Oh no.
Fate can't withstand me.
Mm-hmm. It's such a struggle to watch Neutral Forest try to attain any kind of tempo versus the plethora of tempo swingbacks that this sort of deck in Rune has. Even the choice of Master Mage Levi, Calamitous Curse also would have answered that. Taboos answered that perfectly as well.
There were quite a few options there. Another Dance of Death drawn for Griffin. Unfortunately, again, not a very useful card at the moment.
Mm-hmm. At the very least, if he wanted to cleanly get rid of this Levi, he could play it alongside developing a Kaiser. I don't see much use to the Hector.
That's true. That's true. I mean, honestly, this doesn't look immediately terrible for Griffin, but I have to imagine being in a spot right now, you have to be asking yourself, how do I win this game?
Mm-hmm. I think we observed this yesterday, but what we have come to expect from Forest as a win condition is usually something involving Rush. Interesting, he does go for the Hector, but with Ariat being his win condition, it always just looks so difficult to achieve that kind of a setup.
Right, he's not actually playing Rhinoceros, so that can't be a lethal for him. Professor of Taboos could just come down this turn, trade in the Levi, and just, you know, keep going. You could even evolve something to try and get ahead of the board. You would banish your own zombie doing that, though.
Mm-hmm. I guess the question here is whether Fantasy intends on playing for damage this turn. Throwing down the Taboos would tell me he's just simply playing for another board flip.
I imagine playing for enough board flips against a deck that can't establish a lethal. There's not much out of hand outside of Hector, right? There isn't much out of hand damage that Neutral Forest can do to you. It's not playing Rhinoceros, we've already established. It's not really doing anything that matters as far as that goes. But it looks like he will evolve the Taboos here, take over the Hector, banishes one of his zombies, but he doesn't care really, and push 4, putting Griffin down to 8.
I like this play. It sets up a lethal, assuming Griffin doesn't have any kind of answer to this, and he's probably also imagining that a card like Elf Twin Assault wasn't going to punish him.
Ooh!
But there,
Oh my gosh.
perfect targeting on it
One
as
turn
well.
before it's enhanceable feels bad, man, but I suppose he was expecting double 6s to happen. Double Halo Golem could finish, but he does have open deck list, so I'm not sure. I don't think Halo Golem is in this list. Oh, it is. Never mind. Yeah, it is.
Right, playing around that, I imagine Griffin is feeling like he has to throw down his hand at this point. Though, with the inability to find Beauty and the Beast, which we had been anticipating from the start, it looks like that's just a clean and cut matchup for Fantasy here.
Unbelievable. Shapely and succulent.
He does actually need to
Unfortunately-
draw. Well, never mind. Carrot played. Actually gave him the lethal there with Dance of Death.
Mm-hmm. Carrot and Unica not going to do enough, and I guess we see this kind of situation very often, where area just sits in hand for the entirety of the game. It was just never an appropriate setup for it.
Well, realistically, there are some situations you can create where you can play an area, but her main point of the deck is to give Beauty and the Beast double strike, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that will be a fairly decisive victory. That was a very interesting Earthright deck. I actually want to see that a bit more. It's not every day that we see. I guess honestly, that's just like that's probably really, really strong against mid-range sword. I would bet.
Well, funnily enough, it only actually runs one copy of the Professor of Taboos we saw there, and only one copy of the Calamitous Curse as well. So perhaps just playing the playset of Master Mage Levi's for this 6-cost mid-game reactive sort of card is probably to push down aggro or the like.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think this trend continues throughout all the qualifiers. Is what is neutral forest, right? What is this thing?
Yeah.
What is this thing? And it kind of, in some ways, I feel like it's akin to Atomy in many ways. I think we've seen a lot of Atomy decks in the qualifiers, but we've seen it fail fantastically, right? We've seen it brick very, very hard, and that just feels like what Neutral Force has been doing over and over and over again. And, you know, even in this scenario, you're going to want to mulligan the 2 cards in your combo away, right? Because it's just not getting you that early curve that you really need. So we'll see if Griffin can put it together here, but against Aggro Sword, what do you guys think the chances are that Griffin makes it out?
Well, Mofo, I'll let you take that one. What do you think's going to happen?
At the moment, if Griffin ends up with a hand similar to what he had last game, I see him already very, very defensively using one of his only options that really puts a lot of reactive impact on the board, then I think that this is almost always handed to Aggro Sword. Just because the amount of damage that can come down, or the amount of pressure that develops onto the board by the time Forest tries to play Beauty and the Beast, is just simply too much for even their win condition to make a difference. But we'll have to see. I think it depends very much on Griffin's draw.
Usually, and just so people know, this is an Aggro Sword that is playing. I think normally Aggro Sword has more 1-drops than this. He is playing 9, but I think you play like 11 usually in Aggro Sword. But he's playing an extra Alwedas, so he has 2 Alwedas, and he's playing a 1-of Fangblade Slayer. Other than that, he's a very, very general Aggro Sword that we've become very familiar with. And honestly, like we had the conversation I think yesterday, how Aggro Swords seem to have been pushed off the map kind of by all these mid-range decks, and it's kind of interesting to see it here, getting pretty far and doing pretty well.
A lot of damage on the side of Fantasy. Has a full setup for not only developing the board this turn, but dealing damage from his hand almost every turn afterwards. So, Griffin did find one of his Kindly Trounce, one of the better wards for dealing with things in the early game.
And he drew a neutral to activate it this turn, so he can just play Elf Twins Kindly Treant and be in a pretty good spot.
That hedges against Albert very, very impressively.
That's honestly quite impressive. He hits the 3 health follower without even trying. He could have actually evolved and attacked first to make sure that didn't happen, but
you think Griffin is trying to go for some damage?
He could actually face for 7. Oh my gosh. I was saying that as he did it. Because he got the roll there, he went for a 50-50 on that. And because he got that, he can go face for 7. That's some insane pressure.
That's a lot of confidence, I think, too, to play like that. Or to say that whether or not he's willing to take more damage on his followers, assuming he doesn't get the hit on the 3-3, but he's willing to risk it to put a 7-7 base that turn.
Right, and I do think it's going to work out for him. But again, that's another interesting thing about Griffin's playstyle. That's the second time now that we've seen him evolve the Strix a turn after playing it and going face with it. You know, he doesn't have Area at this time clogging his hand up. He's got a much better play in Chrysalia Arian. But that's the second time we've seen such aggression come out from him.
I was almost holding my breath expecting a Dance of Death to continue that line of aggression. We saw something like that last game. But Aaron controls Fantasy's ability to respond here very well, protects the 7-7. I like that play a lot. It could be very decisive here. In fact, what does
the
Fantasy
7-7 is actually going to end the game, I think.
I don't think Fantasy has any tools left to respond to this with.
Yeah, he has nothing. He would need like a Caholan or something, which I don't think is in the deck.
The legend begins.
And I think it's smart of him to go for the Perseus here, as Perseus does have an evolve effect which gives it ward, but As we know, Griffin holding onto that Dance of Death is just not going to be enough to protect him.
Right, it unfortunately isn't going to do much. Those Kaisers are kind of useless, but that Dance of Death is all he needs to attack 3 times with this giant bird, and it win the game.
An exemplary battle.
Well, that didn't last very long. So now I'm actually starting to notice the pressure and impact that Imperial Strix can have, or Impartial Strix, excuse me.
Right, impartial Strix. Yeah, I mean, a 4-play 0.55, if you can evolve it into a 7/7, if that goes face, that's 7 damage. That is massive to happen. You know, we think that Albert on 5 is a big deal. He's only 5. Strix is 7, so...
Simply mounting and playing to protect it alone decided that entire matchup. So, quickly enough, we move on to what I believe is his NGE Shadow list.
I think so, yes. So let's see if Rainy's caster curse carries in, and we see if Atomy gets cursed or not, but...
You must die.
I don't
Hopefully
think
it
it's
doesn't.
a particularly hopeful position to be playing second versus aggro sword in a list this
Oh, definitely
dependent
not,
on
no.
its opening draw.
It's just a 1-drop looking for Atomy, and he finds it. Okay. So Atomy
Nothing
Shadow
close.
does have its namesake card.
The legend
It's
begins.
always difficult to come back against this kind of an opener, though. A 1/2 on turn 1 into Princess Vanguard.
Not to mention being against Sword when they're on the play, and they already have Council of Card Knights available to them, which has a Bane that can be used to kill Atomy.
We also see 2 enemies now. We also see Fantasy playing to prevent this from happening. I wonder what Griffin exactly needs to draw here in order to mount any kind of pressure back onto the board.
You would need a very fortunate chain of 1-drops.
The battlefield awaits.
But it looks like Fantasy's going to apply enough pressure for that not to matter. He goes face for 5 on turn 3. He's got Ephemera in his hand for next turn. This could be a Tyrant top deck is terrible. Belinus hits the 1/3, and this is bad. This is looking really bad. Soul Conversion could
Right.
hopefully kill the 2/1, right?
Or
Or
not.
he hits the 1/3 twice. That's bad. That's pretty bad.
And Fantasy now once again given initiative, able to safely just put down this Ephemera. There is no pressure on him to trade into anything. There's nothing threatening to. There's no threat whatsoever on his board here. Spartoy Soldier, 1 turn, just the tiniest bit late, but could mitigate a small amount of damage here. Though,
Don't
even
think he
stalling
will.
for time.
Also, Card Knights being available means that Bane's going to evolve. Griffin's going to take another 2 from the Storm Knight, and then he's going to take a lot the following turn since he can't clear this board.
You are done for. Try
Now,
getting
evolving the
used
ward,
to
I
it.
find this interesting.
You can get this one.
Oh gosh.
Protects the health on the Bane there, which continues to limit what Griffin is able to do in response.
This is... this looks... If he snipes Ephemera here, this could be okay. Maybe?
The Bane's still putting on so
And he
much
did.
pressure regardless. Very good
He
though.
actually got Ephemera, so that's a good snipe for sure.
Though, I just wonder that Griffin may have been pushed too far back at this point for the hit on the Lurching Corpse there to have really changed the outcome.
I also feel the same way, especially with double Juliet drawn. Fantasy could just flood the board completely since Juliet will reduce the cost of the other one. He can play the Vanguard next to them. This is disgusting. Oh my gosh. This board.
Right.
Oh no.
That's enough to set things up for Albert. Easily knows there's probably nothing within the reach or grasp of NGE Shadow that could deal the board all at once like this. Seems this one's going to be wrapped up soon for Fantasy.
Right, Atomy is available. However, I don't think he can get rid of enough bodies for it to matter. He does draw a Spartor Soldier, which has Ward, but he drew it a bit too late. And he can't play it after Atomy, so...
Hades is only so big.
This is unfortunate. He has to evolve to get the board a little bit, but he's just leaving lethal on the board every time. And that's gonna be Fantasy moving on.
Wouldn't.
Regardless of whether or not he had the Albert to begin with, there was just so much pressure within those first few turns, and Griffin had no way to respond to it.
Looks like you're the winner.
There it is. The concede goes down. CPV Fantasy moving on to the upper finals, continuing his position in the winners bracket It means that he will be very well geared to move on to the grand finals. The story has been told many times. If you make it to the upper finals, you only have one more match to go, and then you are in the season. So Fantasy is able to secure himself that spot. And aggro sword, you know, it's very, very...